Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. Yona of the Dawn is one of those series I took notice of back when it first came out, both because the story sounded interesting and because I continued to hear good things from people who were already watching it as it aired that season. It was one of those anime I always planned to watch someday. I was looking back on my to-watch list recently and couldn't believe it had been 8 years since it first aired, so I decided it was time to finally start it myself. Yona of the Dawn introduces us to the story of the Koka Kingdom, where King Eel preaches peace and pacifism above all else. Because of this, his only child and our heroine, Princess Yona, has lived a carefree life of luxury. Her only concerns are her insecurities about her unusual bright red hair, and her crush on her seemingly oblivious cousin Suwon. And yes, they are first cousins. Suwon's father was King Eel's brother, but this tale takes place in a more medieval time, where royal marriages were often conducted between family members like this, so I tried not to linger too much on that fact. There are really only 3 major players in Yona's life at this stage: her father, her cousin, and Hawk, her other childhood friend who grew up to be her personal bodyguard. Neither Hawk nor King Eel is pleased about her crush on Suwon. Hawk for more obvious, personal reasons, her father for mysterious ones. The man who's always given his daughter everything she wished for refuses her this one request. But Yona is stubborn and convinced that Suwon will be able to change his mind. After all, King Eel has practically been a father to Suwon as well since his own father's death. So she devises a plan to confess to him on the night of her 16th birthday. But it isn't to be. Yona goes to see her father late that night, only to find him murdered, and her beloved cousin is the one holding the sword. On the surface, Suwon comes across like the gentlest soul in existence, possibly even a little naive and airheaded. Yona's strongest memories of him as a child are of him spending time with her when she was sick, how he was her primary comfort after her mother died. But now we see a different side of Suwon. He offers no excuses and shows no regret. He tells Yona he's been planning this for some time, working alongside traitors in the ranks of the castle guards, and reveals that the accident that killed his father, Prince Yuhan, was actually orchestrated by King Eel. Now that she's witnessed his crime, he declares she must be killed as well, but Hawk comes to her rescue, and the two escape into hiding. The first episode or so of this series was literally the only part I didn't love about it, but it wasn't hard to be patient with it. Yona starts out the series incredibly shallow and pretty annoying, but I knew from the start that this was a tale of her growing, not just as a person, but as a princess and a bit as a warrior as well. And after another episode of her struggling to get over the shock of her father's death and now being a fugitive, she morphs into someone who's passionate about reclaiming her kingdom, but also pretty level-headed and down-to-earth, for all that she is still young and naive. Yona was a great protagonist, and there are definitely some writers who could stand to take notes from this series when it comes to writing empowering female characters, because you know what? Her upbringing left her with almost 0 survival skills, and even once she finally managed to convince Hawk to train her with a bow and arrow so she had some way of protecting herself, it was pretty clear she was never going to be the strongest person on the battlefield. At the start, she didn't even really have a feel for what it meant to be a good ruler. She grew up with the mindset that all the important decisions would be her future husband's responsibility, and she'd never once left the royal city before this ordeal. But her passion and determination and desire to improve herself made up for all of that. Watching her train late into the night, she may not understand her kingdom or how it works, but she cares so much about the people in it. It's the thought that counts often feels like an empty platitude, but sometimes it does encompass what really matters. Yona doesn't necessarily have to be the best at anything. She's willing to learn and to delegate, and that's what's going to make her a great ruler someday. Though that someday may be a ways off. There's so much to this story already, just a few episodes in. The Suan reveal, of course, but honestly, the character mystery I was more interested in was whatever's going on with King Eel. Obviously, Yona had a very biased view of him. Hawk's memories show us a firmer side to him, but that side is still in line with Eel being a pacifist. It just proved he'd go to extreme lengths to avoid violence. So it doesn't sound right that he'd kill Suan's father, but there's more to the backstory that complicates things. For one, Eel was the younger brother, so it's a little odd that he was chosen as the successor to the throne in the first place, especially over Yuhan, who'd made a name for himself as a military general and was very well liked by the public. As Yona ventures further out into the kingdom, we see that Eel was an incredibly unpopular king. Even with Suan being so young, a lot of people are eager for anyone else to take over at this point, and it's not hard to see why. Eel's tendency to avoid conflict at all costs has led to him giving away quite a bit of the Coca Kingdom's land to neighboring countries. What's left has grown increasingly difficult to live off of. While the royal city is thriving on foreign trade, it's not uncommon for people living in the country to die of starvation. Early into their travels, Yona and Hawk meet Yoon, a boy who grew up in one of those impoverished towns. Yoon was one of the few to escape that village. Cooking, weaving, sewing, making medicine. If there was a skill that could possibly make him some money from any passing travelers, Yoon learned it. In that sense, he's kind of the exact opposite of Yona, and was her first time encountering someone who resented the royal family for their lifestyle when their citizens are suffering like this. Yoon is one of my favorite characters in general, and I'll definitely find time to talk about him later, but he was especially important for Yona to meet, and not just for the worldview. Yoon has been living with, taking care of really, one of those travelers who passed through his village. Iksu is a goofy, incredibly ditzy man with a heart of absolute gold. He came from the royal city, and upon seeing the condition of the villages, he gave away just about everything he owned, and quickly had anything that was left stolen from him. But not once did he ever grow upset with the thieves. He just hoped his possessions bettered their lives in some way. Yona comes to learn that Iksu was actually banished from the royal city and is living out in the woods in hiding. Iksu is this generation's oracle, a gift that used to be widely respected. Oracles used to live in the castle and tell the royal family's futures. They were worshipped as servants of the gods, and it was said that a lot of the previous king's success came from his oracle's visions. But Prince Yuhan was a more practical sort. So after Yona's grandfather's death, Suwan's father had the oracles exiled, and no one was really in any position to stop him. I think it begs the question of how deep his motives were. If maybe the oracle at the time had foretold something Yuhan didn't want to believe, or had something to do with why he wasn't chosen to be the next king. But that's just speculation on my part. Iksu really kicks off the next stage of their journey. He tells Yona of a legend that says the Coca Kingdom's first king was actually a dragon god who'd taken on human form. This crimson dragon was almost overthrown by his own subjects, but the heavens opened up and 4 of his fellow dragons came down to Earth. But the king stood by the humans and refused to return with them, so the other 4 each gave one loyal human some of their power to better defend the Crimson Dragon. Iksu explains that, to this day, every generation will have 4 individuals who inherit those dragons' powers. A reincarnation of sorts. Iksu believes that Yona herself, with her unusual red hair, is the incarnate of the Crimson Dragon King, and he tells her to seek out the other 4. She doesn't really have anything else to guide her at this point, so along with Hawk and Yoon, she sets off to find them, and hopefully reform and reclaim her kingdom with their combined power. I knew this was going to be a long one. I swear I am trying not to stretch it out too much. I won't take you step by step through Yona finding the dragons, but I do love almost all of the major characters in this story, so I do want to talk about them all a bit, and it's pretty obvious who they each are when they're introduced, so I don't feel particularly like it's spoiling much to name our dragon warriors. I loved this whole group, to the point where it got me a little worried whenever the next dragon was introduced. I didn't want anyone to mess up the dynamic we already had, but each of them just fit, even when they didn't really get along. I've talked about Yona, and a little about Yoon. I want to add how entertaining he was. Sarcastic and delightfully sassy. He had a lot of useful skills, but he was even less of a fighter than Yona was, and that was important to their friendship. It gave her someone she could relate to when all their other companions were monstrously strong. I loved them all, but he was definitely a favorite. And I haven't really talked about Hawk at all. The childhood friend, trapped between his crush and his sense of duty. It's literally his job to protect her, so that made it a little understandable that he was reluctant to teach her how to fight. The bow and arrow was a compromise. At least this way she wouldn't be out on the front line. Hawk's the tough guy of the group. He cares about her a lot, but it's hard to overcome a lifetime of their interactions primarily consisting of teasing and arguing. His crush has been around for a lot longer than he'd like to admit, but she was always so openly infatuated with Suwon, there was never any point in entertaining those dreams before. That teasing has definitely taken on a different feel to it now, but thankfully never goes too far, as Yona's very sheltered and naive. He's partially kept in check by the next person they recruit, Gija the White Dragon. Gija grew up in a very isolated village, one of the few places that still remembers and believes in the legend. He's quite sheltered himself, having been hidden away and waited on his whole life. In this village, the dragon descendant is practically royalty, and they're very suspicious of outsiders. But Gija has a vision of his own when he meets Yona and realizes she's the leader he's been waiting for his whole life, the one he's destined to protect. And wanting that distinction of being the one who protects her makes him clash with Hawk quite a bit, but they have one of those rivalries where they're ready to bite each other's head off one second in awe of the other's abilities the next, and they are working towards the same goal, so coexistence isn't that hard. I guess Yona does have what's basically a harem by the end of this, but it's not the straightforward they're all in love with her and battling for her affections sort. Gija may be moving toward a more standard crush, but as of right now, his is more of an idol-worshipping type devotion. And the next two companions grew up under very different circumstances. Chinha the Blue Dragon has never heard of the legend. His ability makes his village see him like a monster, despite him doing his best to protect them. He's been shunned almost completely, and didn't even have a proper name until Yona gave him one. Traveling with this group is the first time he's experienced real friendship. I think he's quite a ways off from falling in love. And Chinha the Green Dragon is a ladies' man who loves to tease and flirt with Yona, but it's hard to tell how serious he is about it. There are some good moments where he's clearly starting to genuinely respect her, but Chinha was the most reluctant to join up. More than any of the others, he had his own life before this group strolled into town. He'd also been cast out of his village because of his dragon powers, and when we meet him, he's joined up with a pirate crew, trying to overthrow a trafficking ring in the local port city. Yona's horrified to see such atrocities being committed in her kingdom, so she also decides to help out, winning him over in the end. It's the last little arc the anime covers, and it's really great. There's also a yellow dragon, but we'll get back to him. There's one last major character I want to talk about, because Suwon is a lot more than just a two-faced villain. This may sound strange, given how the series starts out, but he's really not such a bad guy in the grand scheme of things. At least, the series spends quite a lot of time showing the viewers that he does also want to do right by this kingdom. It's going to be doubly hard for Yona to take back over when she is ready, because he's been doing a good job of winning people over and correcting King Eel's wrongs. I also have to mention, we get a few scenes of Suwon reflecting on what he's lost in exchange for power. It really stood out to me, the way he talks about his two childhood friends. He describes them as my right-hand man and a girl who loved me. You can't tell me he didn't value one of those friendships more than the other. Whenever he talked about them, I always got the impression he genuinely missed Hawk, but Yona was almost of material value to him. It made me sad on her behalf. While I may not have ever shipped them, and Yona was pretty shallow for most of her life, her feelings for him weren't based on anything overly superficial. It may have been a little about his looks and a little about his battle skills, but it was primarily about his kindness, and the show did manage to convince me that he was genuinely kind. I didn't get the impression that Suwon had been plotting this for a long time. Obviously, it wasn't something he just did on a whim one day, but all their sweet, heartwarming moments as kids felt real. As soon as he kills Eel, we start to see him with some sort of attendant that no one else knows. He's basically Suwon's personal advisor, and he's giving me major Jafar vibes. It really makes me curious how Suwon came to learn that Eel was responsible for his father's death. Because right now, my money's on him hearing it from this guy, and that this advisor's long-term goals are probably to take over himself. Which again raises the question of whether those accusations are actually true. But all I can do from this point on is speculate. We've finally reached my closing thoughts, and the unfortunate truth that this story is still incomplete. The manga is still publishing, and the anime really only feels like the first phase of the story. We collected the first 3 dragon warriors, and the 4th literally just appears in their campsite one day, but it ends on the note that Yona still doesn't feel quite ready to try and take back her castle and overthrow Suwon. Yona of the Dawn is one of the few series that really is nigh perfect for me. Literally, the only thing that's holding it back is that it's incomplete. The music and the animation are both great. I love the story. It's emotional and intriguing and uplifting. I love all the characters, and most importantly, I love that the anime took its time introducing us to each of them. Well, with the exception of the yellow dragon, maybe. I'll be interested to see if his introduction happens the same way in the manga. There have definitely been times in the past when I found myself wanting to bargain with a series, when I would have willingly sacrificed some time spent getting to know certain characters or exploring certain story arcs if it meant that series would have had time for a more conclusive ending. But I really can't say that about this one. It didn't feel like any time was wasted. We just needed more of it. In all these years since it came out, I can't believe Yona of the Dawn has never gotten a second season. It's added a series to the list of manga I'm definitely going to have to pick up one day. It's just too good for me to walk away without knowing what comes next. And I usually have some reservations when a show doesn't have a solid ending, but I recommend anyone who skipped this one check it out too. The journey so far was enjoyable enough that I don't feel too disappointed in having to find the ending in another medium. Thank you for watching.